All right. Good people. I hope everybody's well. Welcome back to the Onyx Report, Black Masculinist news for the day. We are in here at usually an earlier time than we normally go, but we're doing it for a good reason. Got an opportunity to have a conversation with a longtime friend of the show. So we will get to that in a very brief moment, but we got to cover some housekeeping things. So first and foremost, appreciate everybody that has stopped through across different platforms. We're already at nearly 70 viewings, so please make sure you hit the like button on the way in. Like, share, subscribe, join, and donate. Support the channel so we can continue to bring you this independent black male thought. So shout out to the brothers who came through early. Adric, what's up? Malika, what's going on? Ilyas, Nameless, Grab Second Gear, Inspired Truth, Valeri, got Uncle Fire in the house, Christopher, Shiva, LXST, what's good with you? Shiva, Wayne, Strong and Courageous, Barry, and shout out to Malika for dropping the first in tonight's plate. So we got a number of folks still coming through. Welcome all. Shout out to Barry for dropping information on the channel. It is much appreciated. Also, y'all know the deal. I say this every time I can. Support the Growth Talk with Kofa channel. Appreciate you for dropping in a few dollars. It's Peace Doc, Peace Chat. Support Black Male Media. Real talk. Make sure you support the Growth Talk with Kofa channel. So we can get this going. We got folks coming in the door, and I'm glad to see it. Now, y'all know I've been doing a little interview series with a few people that I respect. And this is my favorite journalist, so I got to make sure that I give him the props he deserves, and we'll get into some of those details in a moment. Very briefly, let me go. All right, so let me make sure. Okay. All right, so we're dealing with some technical stuff, but we're good. Make sure you support the channel. You can do that through Patreon, Cash App, PayPal, Venmo. You can become a patron of the channel on Patreon and support the Onyx Report right here on YouTube and or the Institute for Black Male Studies. So you can do both, or you can, provide super chats right here on YouTube to help the channel come along. I know the deal. So all the information is right there on the screen. And if you haven't already, make sure you pick up my latest Solutions for Anti-Black Misandry, Flat Blackness, and Black Male Death on Rutledge Focus. So you can go ahead and do that. And you can pick that book up anywhere you buy books, Amazon, you know the deal. So please make sure you support if you can. Right? I just wanted to get some of that housekeeping out the way because with this whole interview series, if you're not familiar, I started with Dr. Tommy Curry a couple weeks ago. I started after that, Dr. Ronald Neal. And so it's kind of been an organic endeavor, bringing up brothers I respect to talk about the recent election, their thoughts on it, their reflections, things that people missed, things that people didn't see coming, and of course, the response to Trump's presidency. So we're using this opportunity to give brothers the stage who need to be heard, in my humble opinion. Without further ado, I'm gonna go ahead and bring the good brother up. This is, as I said earlier, my favorite journalist, the Torraine Walker. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing good, brother. How are you, man? Thank you for having me on again.
Oh man, it's good. Let's see, I'm getting a little echo. Let me see if I can do something about it. Let's see, I'm not sure if that'll help. Okay, that sounds a little better on my end. You guys let me know out there if you can hear it clearly. If everything between us is good, hit me with a 1. And if not, let me know. But all right. So you have been doing some phenomenal work in my personal opinion, but something has happened recently that definitely requires not only some applause, but some acknowledgement. Now, before we get to that, if you can share. All right, so we got ones. Good. I think we're clear. If you could share with my audience what has transpired, or actually before that, tell us a little bit about your background as a journalist and what sets you apart, in your opinion, from other journalists.
All right. Well, my background is in mainstream journalism. From there, I moved into independent journalism. Basically, I was moving, I was doing a lot of conversations, have a lot of conversations in the protest movement. I moved from that into talking about things that were happening in the black community because at the time there was sort of a hunger in mainstream spaces for black stories because of the protests and everything that was going on. But what I saw was that there was a lot of conversations that were getting twisted up. Yeah, there's an echo a little bit going on.
All right, let's see how that's done.
All right, Ken, how about now? Yeah, it's a lot better.
Is it you guys hearing an echo? Because I can hear an echo on my voice. Okay, somebody's saying mute up while he's talking. I was muted actually, but I'll try it again.
I don't know what happened, but it was coming through pretty good. And now I don't hear an echo at all.
Okay, so now they're saying that there's no echo. Okay, all right, maybe it's just in my headphones. As long as you guys can't hear it, we're good. Go ahead, man.
No, it's all good. Technical difficulties happen. But no, like I was saying, I started out in mainstream journalism. I was writing for HuffPost, and I was also doing a lot of stringer and freelance stuff for like places like Vice and other things. But what I saw the way that black stories and stories that were centered on black American stories were getting twisted, and we weren't being able to really edit and tell our own stories. So I moved out of mainstream journalism, and I started doing independent journalism. I was doing it on my own dime, going around just talking about stories that interested me, people who were doing activist work, people who were doing community work. And I built that into what I do now. I basically go out and I look for stories that interest me and can help inform our people. And that's what I focus on right now. I just tell black stories.
Okay. And you've been doing it how long?
I've been doing that going on about 8 or 9 years professionally now.
Beautiful. Talk to us a little bit about this. Let me go ahead and put this up. So this is one of the latest developments. You recently got picked up in some fashion by Newsweek. Tell us how that happened.
Well, I have a couple of connects who are still in the mainstream media world, and I just saw some of the conversations that were happening around this election. Some of them were accurate, a lot of them were not. A lot of them were, in my opinion, based in emotion. So what I wanted to do was just basically do a deep dive into the campaign, coming from a brand strategist point of view, because I also do digital media and I also know about marketing. So I saw some things that were working and some things that did not, and I saw where some of the niche marketing that was happening in that campaign were not going to fly. So anyway, I pitched that to a contact. They forwarded to an editor at Newsweek. We had a conversation, and they ran the piece, and it looked like it's going to be ongoing.
Now, I think that this is important because anything that kind of mirrors an independent black male perspective doesn't seem to make it through. Is that your sense of it, or what is your sense of the black male voice, especially in this last election?
Oh, no, that's absolutely true. And that's something that's been going on almost, I'd say, in the mainstream, well, officially for the last 5 or 6 years. And just to walk through it with your audience, I think what happened was there was a big groundswell of concern and interest in stories that were outside of the mainstream. I'm talking about, again, because of the heat that came up over the George Floyd verdict, and also because of the protests, a lot of mainstream people were looking to try to talk to anybody who was black to be able to get a perspective on what was going on. And there wasn't any sort of like freezing out of black men at that time. But what happened was, as those stories began to get more and more prevalent, what started to happen was you started to see black male voices starting to get frozen out of the conversation to the point where the only people that were getting any sort of light in mainstream were like black women. And that's not to talk down on black women. It's just that there was such a one-sided perspective, and it wasn't even all black women. It was black women coming from a particular point of view. And we'll get into that as the conversation goes on. So a lot of brothers who were outside and a lot of brothers who had things to offer were starting to get frozen out. And I think what's happening now is that I think a lot of mainstream media sources and a lot of political parties put all their eggs in that one basket, and it didn't pay off. So now I think there's a lot more opening to see that we're still concerned about what black people are talking about, but now we got to open that market up and we got to listen to everybody in the community. So that's why I was able to get my conversation started. That's how I was able to run that piece.
Yeah, it seemed like the only black men that could be heard were the kind of the Roland Martins, even the Magic Johnsons, anybody that was completely on board with Harris, no pushback, no reflection, no questions being asked. Those seem like the only brothers that could kind of get through. So when I saw that title, before I even knew you wrote it, I was shocked because I was like, how did this get through? But why did you choose that particular topic? And tell us a little bit about the importance of the approach you took with that piece at this moment.
Well, I took the approach I did because what I saw in the marketing of Kamala Harris was she wasn't really marketed as a politician. She
Mm,
was marketed as sort of like an extension of the concept of black girl magic. And
mhm,
as I say in the piece, the concept of black girl magic is really amorphous, but the baseline of it is, black women have been able to succeed and achieve and thrive in the face of all the adversity thrown at them in black America. And that part is true. And that everything that black women have achieved in this country is amazing and it does need to be applauded. However, if you're running a candidate, even if you're selling a product, you have to understand that you're appealing to different facets of society, just like different marketing camps, just like different products like a car, or even if you're trying to sell soda, you have to have different commercials, you have to have different ads that go to different segments of your society. And I felt like they were trying to market her almost as a celebrity. But what you saw was like, the focus was on what she was wearing. The focus was on like, stuff like collard greens and how she cooked collard greens. And that's a whole nother conversation we just got off of Thanksgiving I'm not finna get into. But
mhm.
things like that are like amorphous and like trivial and they don't talk about what she could do as a candidate and what would she be able to do for the populace outside of looking good and outside of wearing certain outfits and dancing and doing this sort of thing. Even to the way that she was marketed, where she's got rallies being led by like Megan Thee Stallion and like Cardi B and stuff like that is stuff you do for entertainers. It's not what you do for somebody you want to take serious as a politician. So I just wanted to come at it that way. And I'm like, if you're marketing her this way, this is not going to work if you're trying to appeal to a broad range of society. It's just not. And we saw the effects of it.
Yeah. Well, let me go back a bit because a lot of people may not know that you're pretty active on Twitter and that you actively comment on politics on a regular basis, and most particularly how Black folk engage politics, and sometimes the inner conversations that happen in our community. But I want to go back to the initial Biden Trump debate that really kicked off this whole era because that was the moment we learned, or at least it was confirmed, that Biden had some issues. Now, those who follow politics, this wasn't a surprise. We saw Biden having some problems before that. But this became the point where the Democratic Party really began to look at it and say, you know what, we can't ride with him. From that moment forward, most particularly in regard to Harris being the front runner, what were your thoughts starting then? And where did that go throughout the course of her campaign?
Well, if you're somebody who's had somebody in your family who's an elder, and
Mhm.
if you've had somebody who's dealt with some health issues along the lines that Biden dealt with, some of the things that you saw and some of the behaviors you saw were pretty obvious.
Yeah.
Obviously we didn't have any hard, definite proof of it until it finally came to the light. But what was fascinating to me was that these were things that were clearly obvious. And I understand how it works. If you're a partisan person, you have to like stand up for your side. But some of these things were so obvious and they were so insulting to the intelligence of the voting public that I felt like if they don't get in front of this or at least acknowledge it, there's going to be some serious problems. And if you look at the way some of the people in the DNC and people who were heavy in the bag for the Democratic Party and Biden in general were saying, it was like there's no problems, there's no issues. Where I personally would have thought it would have been smarter to say, okay, he does have some issues, something's going on, but he's still capable. But as it got worse and worse and worse, and then leading up to the debate, where we can pretend it didn't happen, but he got washed in that debate by Trump, and that should not have happened. To the
Yeah.
point where he looked like it almost looked like the way Tupac said in Bomb First, looking like Larry Holmes flabby and sick.
Oh, wow.
That's
Yeah.
what it looked like. And when it became obvious to the voting public, then you saw the Democratic machine started getting gear. It's like, okay, this isn't going to fly. We got to get somebody else into this place. And if you and as it has come out, there were younger Democratic Congress people who were going to the White House and saying, "Look, it's time to bring somebody fresh in." And there were shouting matches about that as it came out. But
Yeah.
anyway, to get to the point where you bring Kamala in, where she had basically a ready-made fan base. She stepped into a campaign 3 months, 3 months up to the election, which was a very short time to move in. But with the amount of money that was raised for Kamala Harris almost overnight when she declared, and with the amount of people who got on her side and the amount of organizations, especially black organizations, black, legacy organizations, that campaign should have had a lot better marketing than it got. I'm still like
Mm.
for her to bring in $1 billion that quickly, and
Mhm.
this is what you came up with, it was ridiculous to me. And I felt like when I saw it going that way, I'm like, she may win, but she may not. And if she doesn't win, it's because the messaging is off and you're trying to bully people into voting for this woman without coming with tangibles. I'm like, it's not going to go well.
Well, if we remember too, there was a long period of silence from her campaign right as she was kind of announced, right? There was a period of, I can't really recall how many days it was, but it was about a month, I want to say, or if
Hmm.
not more. But it was a long period of silence that kind of took place right at that moment. And a lot of people were just kind of scratching their head, like, what's going on here? This is crucial time, considering how much time she actually had before the actual election. So that was kind of a question mark in and of itself. And something Yvette Carnell said kind of really hit me. She said, when you're the vice president, you need to be prepared to hit the ground running. She said, you need to have a website ready to go, especially if you got somebody with Biden's kind of issues. You need to have a website ready. You need to have talking points. You need to have policies kind of ready to go. What do you think happened in that time period? And what do you think it did to her election, her possibility, her as her campaign?
It was not good. I think it did a lot of damage because, as you're talking about, when her website went up for her campaign, um, for about the first 20 days, if you went to the Harris campaign website, the only thing on there was a donation link to donate, which is
Mm,
not which is fine because every politician has that.
mhm,
But there was nothing else for 20 days. There
mhm.
was no policy, there was no agenda, no platform. And when people asked about that, because I asked about that as well, what you got was the response you got was, first of all, it was insulting, and then there was a lot of condescension about like she's only had X amount of days to get this together, and it does, you have to have something overnight. And what I know, even if somebody who's just running for a city council seat, if they put up a website in a couple of days, they can throw up a platform about what they stand for right there. So for somebody to be the vice president
Yeah.
and not have any sort of platform planks within a month, and it takes a month for that to come out, that's very, very shoddy workmanship. I'm sorry. And also, when you have other candidates like Jill Stein had an agenda for Black America on her
Yes,
website
yes,
like
yes.
2 days after she announced, and it was very thorough. And I'm like,
Yep.
you're the vice president, and you don't have anything. Not even saying that you have to have a Black agenda, but there's nothing there, and then it takes almost a month for that to show up. That's just not doesn't look good. And that's what I'm talking about. You can't run on things like that. I'll just say aside of saying that I'm a woman and vote for me because of that. You have to have more than that. And it's not about trying to come down on a woman. It's not trying to say that you're judging her harder than anybody else. Those are just basic marketing tactics, and those are just basic marketing things you should have in place when somebody asks what they're buying and what they're voting for you for.
Talk about the media's treatment of both campaigns in your opinion, especially when we're still trying to figure out what she stands for. Of course, we've already had an experience with Trump as president, but as the campaigning started to kind of move forward, especially after she went to actually after Trump first met with the Association for Black Journalists, what were your thoughts about how the media treated both campaigns?
I'm gonna put on my marketing and branding hat right now, but I feel like the way that they were treated, the way Trump was treated, was not really that much different than how he was treated in 2016 and the 2 years before that, and through his election. Um, for the most part, liberal mainstream media, they treated him as the boogeyman, which is what I expected. And there was going to be a lot of attacks, especially with his court cases and things like that, which is what I expected. What I saw happening from media when it came to Kamala, it goes back to what I said earlier. There was a lot of marketing of her as a celebrity and marketing of her as a personality. You
Mhm.
didn't see a lot of conversation about, okay, these are the Democratic Party's platform planks. This is how Kamala fits into these platform planks, and this is what she's projecting, and this is how she's selling herself. That's what I saw from from mainstream media. What I saw from the Republican campaign is what I've talked about before. The Republican Party, whether they agree with Trump or not, and a lot of them have been very vocal about not agreeing with Trump, when he became the nominee, especially after the assassination attempt, the Republicans are very, very good at getting in lockstep with whoever the nominee is, right or wrong, good or bad. They're going to follow the nominee no matter who he is. And I saw that happening. I don't say I agree with it, but they're very good at that. What I saw from the Democrats was there was a lot of prevarication about, okay, is Biden still going to carry out his term? Is he going to resign? What's going to happen here? Even while they were ramping up Kamala to become the nominee, I think that was kind of an issue when they were prevaricating about that. I think what happened at the convention was a mistake as well, because remember, there wasn't an open convention. It was like, she's the nominee. This is what we're going for. And that turned off a lot of Democrat voters who would have probably voted for her anyway if she would have been nominated at the convention. That didn't happen. So it felt more like a coronation instead of like a nomination. And I
Right.
think that turned a lot of people off. Also, you've got to deal with the fact that Gaza was going on as well, this was going on as well. And the Democratic Party response to that, and the Biden administration response to that, has been lukewarm at best. And I'm using the term, and I'm being very, very, very generous with that. So I feel
Yeah.
like there were a lot of things in play that didn't really help either campaign. But what Trump had was the momentum of being already the president for 4 years. Also, that assassination attempt was something that was a wave that they could ride right into the White House, whereas the Democrats had to ramp up.
Yeah. Even just the photo of his fist in the air, blood off his, coming down his face. I figured that would do a lot for his
Hmm.
image as far as that was concerned. But talk a little bit about, if you would, policy. Now, as we said earlier, we were waiting to hear what the Democrats' policy offers would be this time around. Took a while before we heard very much, but things like Gaza, things like APAC, things like um, this whole question of the economy and inflation. Where do you think those things, how do you think they were weighed by each candidate in that regard versus what we got? I mean, we heard about abortion, we heard about that a lot, but
Hmm.
there were other issues that many argued should be dealt with. What were your thoughts about how those things were handled by both candidates?
Well, what Trump did very well was that he tied the issue of immigration, and also especially illegal immigration and on unfair trade balances, to the economy. And there have been studies done on this going back to the 1980s. No matter what party you belong to, the economy is the number one issue for every voter, whether they're Democrat, Republican, or independent. What Trump did was he took white fear and he was able to galvanize white fear and fear of replacement into solid economic policy. It doesn't mean that it was true, but he was very good at tying those issues together. And that, if you're a middle class white guy, or even if you're a poor or working class white guy, that's a message that's going to appeal to you, whether it's true or not. Because if you see money coming out of your pocket that's going to Ukraine, or if you see money going out of your pocket that you identify with sending weapons to Israel that are going to blow up children, no matter if you're of hard right, nobody really likes the images of children being blown up, no matter who you are. And I think Trump was very good in his campaign, and his people were very good at tying that together. The mistakes that what Kamala did and what the DNC did is what they always do. And I talk about this in the piece. They focus on a lot of niche issues. They focus on, things like gender identity. They focus on a lot of issues about, people who are transgender playing in sports. And no, not to say that those are not important issues, but for somebody who's trying to go to work, and for somebody who's worried about how they're going to pay their bills and pay their rent and pay their mortgage, those are very minor, insignificant issues to somebody like that. And that is the majority of the voter base. Not to say that you have to disregard people in the niches and in the margins, but people who you're trying to appeal to get the vote for you, you have to talk about economics. You have to talk about policy that's going to benefit them. The sort of things that were happening where you focus on DEI, which is a very important thing, but again, you have to focus on how are these things going to tie into my bottom line. And the Democratic Party and Kamala's people did not do that. They focus so much on a lot of issues that may appeal to somebody on a college campus, but they
Mm,
don't appeal to somebody who's trying to go to work and trying to provide for their kids. And that was the mistake. Those niche issues, I think something that's a major issue in New York and LA is not a major issue in Iowa and Kansas. And that's where they fell down.
I'm glad you said that, because being on a college campus, being in these social media spaces, I hear about DEI, I hear about pronouns, I hear about this kind of stuff all over the place. But sometimes it's easy to lose touch of what everyday people across the country deal with every day versus what you may hear in certain spaces. So there's an issue of scaling. It seems like you're kind of pointing to, and it looks like the Democrats really misjudged how important some of those issues were versus the ones that we should be talking about. How are
Hmm.
people going to eat? You know what I mean? But
Absolutely.
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
No, go ahead.
Absolutely. And there's a reason for this, because a lot of times, and this is something this something happens with both parties, but we're going to focus on the Democrats right now. A lot of the people who run political campaigns, especially state and presidential campaigns, they get pulled from a very small pool of people who either live in D.C., New York, or L.A. And they're coming to every campaign with a DC, New York, and LA mindset. And like I said earlier, the issues that people talk about in, beltway bars in like DC, or in like high end penthouse parties in New York or in Hollywood, The people who live in Florida, the people who live in Atlanta, the people who live in Texas, they are so far removed from that world that the messaging that comes out of those places and they try to sell to people who are trying to go to work, there's a complete disconnect and it's not going to work. And we saw what happened. And I think that's why some of that messaging gets disconnected. And that's why you see a lot of disconnect between candidates and the people they're trying to reach.
Well, I think something similar happened, and you point this out in the article about celebrity worship. You know, this kind of idea that the more celebrities we're going to get on stage, the more it's going to lock in the win, as it were. And you know, she brought in people like Beyonce and so on and so forth. Um, Talk a little bit about this idea that links to celebrities guarantee a win. How do policies need to readjust going forward in light of what we just saw?
Well, I will say this. I think the country is going through celebrity fatigue, and they're going through celebrity. They're going through celebrity. I hate to say this, but the celebrity begging fatigue. There's a thing that's happening where, especially when we're talking about black electorate, and I want to focus on the black electorate while I explain this. There is this unrelenting narrative that will not die in some of these circles that I just mentioned when we're talking about political communication, that the only way to appeal to black voters is one or two ways, either with the church and a choir, because we all know that old tired cliche of the old white politician coming up and putting on a church robe and clapping with everybody, or through celebrities and the fish fry. And I think what's happening now is this is the first time that you've seen black people able to voice their frustration and tell that they're getting. And I think that mentality is reaching the level of oversaturation where black people are tired of being catered to by celebrities, and they're tired of being talked down to by celebrities because the celebrity full court press in the black electorate was crazy this year. You had people like Plies, you had people like Cardi, you had people like Megan Thee Stallion and other people. They were pulling celebrities out of everywhere, and I think what's happening now is that people are tired of trying to be talked down to about what they should vote for and what they should care about by people who are so far removed from their economic status and so far removed from their everyday life that it's not working anymore. I think that's what's happening. Also, another thing that's going on is a lot of these people who they're pulling are celebrities who are, again, so far caught up in the idea of social media, and they're so oversaturated on social media that a lot of the cachet the celebrity used to have maybe like even 5 or 6 years ago is kind of played out because we see these people talking on Twitter and dancing on TikTok to the point where people are sick of looking at them. And it's like, if I see you dancing and pop locking all the time, what do you got to tell me about my daily life? You know what I mean? If I see you wilding out and beefing with people every day on social media, what can you tell me about my daily life? I'm trying to go to work. You know what I mean? I got 2 or 3 kids I'm trying to raise. You know what I mean? I'm worried about how am I going to put my kids through a good school. People who are celebrities don't have these issues, so you can't really come down and dictate to somebody who's going through these things and tell them that they're wrong for not wanting to vote for you just because you want to go out here and twerk. That doesn't work anymore. I think it's just oversaturated and people are just fed up with it.
Yeah. Your your thoughts about how much the campaign actually spent in regard to this, and I would juxtapose that with Trump. I mean, it's not like Trump didn't deal with celebrities at all. He did, but was there a difference between the two in your opinion? And I'm not an insider, so I didn't look into this uh,
Mhm.
in terms of how much was invested in this celebrity strategy. Any sense of that from you?
Well, I think Trump had the advantage of already running on a precedent of being president for 4 years.
Mhm.
And there was a lot of celebrities as far as like in his community that you saw leaning into, but nowhere near the level that Kamala's campaign did. I mean, he had people like Kid Rock and Ted Nugent, people who basically are not really in the mainstream anymore. But the people who will shell out money to go see Kid Rock and people who will go out to see Ted Nugent, you're talking about old white retirees who have boats and everything, and they have money to drop like $2,000 or $3,000 or sometimes $10,000 on this campaign. The people who Kamala got and pulled into her campaign, these are celebrities where like the general fan base for somebody like that may not have an economic resource to be able to pull it in. It'll be a spectacle. People will come out to see the performer, just like the rally that happened in Houston and Milwaukee. People didn't really come out to see Kamala. People came out because Megan Thee Stallion was performing. People showed up in Houston because it was a Beyonce concert. That's what that pulled in. And it was almost like it was almost like Kamala was trying to get famous, trying to get sympathy by osmosis. Like if I stand next to Beyonce, then you'll rock with me. And if I stand next to Megan Thee Stallion or Cardi B, then you'll rock with me. And if you're trying to be the leader of the free world, you have to lead that conversation. You can't be seen as sort of like a hanger on for a celebrity. Nobody's going to take you serious. And I think that's another thing that happened with her. And it goes back to what I said earlier about if you're seen as somebody who's an added adjunct to a celebrity, what do you have to tell me outside of what can you really tell me if you're seen as trying to hang on to this celebrity for their and ride their coattails instead of standing up and do that? And I think that's something that Obama did very well. Obama had a lot of celebrity cachet when he was running, but he never lost sight of the fact that I'm running for president and I'm leading this parade, and they're coming along with me. I'm not coming along with them.
Yeah. I want to read a section of your piece, get your thoughts on it here. So you said the election saw the Democratic Party deeply invest in the concept of Black girl magic. The idea that even in the face of systemic adversity, Black women in America are capable of reaching and exceeding the expectations of society imposed upon them when it comes to motherhood, education, entrepreneurship, and a multitude of other areas. It's an idea that's very influential in celebrity culture and represented exclusively by Black women celebrities. But here's the other point I wanted to go to. Kamala Harris was the political extension of the idea of Black girl magic. And in focusing so heavily on that point, the Democrats created for themselves blind spots that ignored an aggressive pushback against DEI. Talk a little bit about that shift, if you would. That didn't look like the Democrats really paid much attention to. It seemed like they were riding with the idea that just rolling with Black women as the face of it was going to be enough. Or is that a misread? What do you think?
No, I think that very much is pretty much on point. I think what happened there is, again, like I said, I think the Democrats and the Democratic machine were running on this idea of you can guilt somebody into voting for you. And I think what happens is when you start thinking like that again, it does not appeal to, it may appeal to people in the Beltway and it may appeal to people in the major urban areas where there's a lot more diversity. But if you're trying to reach out to people in Iowa, in Kansas, again, like I said, in Wisconsin, in Michigan, places like that, those sort of messaging, that sort of messaging is not going to really fly with them because they're concerned about their working class lives and they're concerned about their middle class lives. You can talk about Black women, and we all know the history of Black women in America, what they've suffered and what they've endured. But again, you had to give people more than that, especially in the post protest era, as I like to call it. We've had 4 years since George Floyd of people being told that this is a racist country, and it is. And we've been told that what happens to Black people in this country is wrong, and it is. But beyond that, this country has not fallen apart, even in spite of all those things that they've seen, whether the protests, whether the outrage, whether the outbursts. So people have gotten kind of comfortable with that sort of marketing, and they've gotten comfortable with that messaging. Now we're in an election year, and you got to give people more than that. You can't give people joy. Hope is not going to work again. You have to give people tangibles. And the Democratic Party and Kamala's campaign did not lean into tangibles. There was very little conversation about this is what I will do for the middle class. This is what I will do for the poor and the working class, almost until the 11th hour, like a week, maybe 2 to 3 weeks before the election came down, you started seeing that messaging roll out, and it's too late by then. You got to come out the gate with these things. And if you raise that much money in that little time, where you had like Divine Now organizations raising $2 to $3 million overnight, where you had like a lot of the other Black Greek organizations raising another 1.9, that's enough money. And plus, you've had 2 to 3 years to line up a campaign. That's more than enough time to say, this is what I'm going to hit the ground with. This is what I see. This is what I want to focus on, instead of waiting almost a month and a half to put something up on a website and then start running on that. That was crazy to me.
Your thoughts about Black men. Now, one of the reasons I start with the Biden-Trump debate is because not long after that, when I first heard that Harris was the front runner for the Democrats, I immediately started to hear Black men being blamed preemptively on mainstream television by the likes of people like Joy Reid, numbers of others who were already starting to frame Black men as the reason she may lose. Your thoughts about the perceptions of Black men and Black men's responses from that early point of the announcement of Harris as the front runner to now. What are your thoughts about how Black men were treated in this dynamic?
Well, when she was announced as the nominee, I knew that was going to happen. I knew we were going to see sort of like a repeat of what we saw in 2020, where there was a phenomenon that I like to call blame black men.
Yeah.
I actually coined a hashtag called blame black men, and I got a lot of traction off that. But it's because they're, like I said earlier, a lot of the people who do a lot of the messaging for the black electorate, and a lot of the people who do a lot of the messaging for the Democratic Party, they tend to be black feminists, and
Yeah.
not even just any sort of black feminists. They tend to be black radical feminists. And a lot of the major tenets of radical feminism is this idea that all men are toxic and all men are bad, regardless of their financial status, regardless of whatever their socioeconomic status is. So I knew that was going to happen. I knew there was going to be another round of you black men are misogynistic, and if you're hesitant about voting for Kamala, it's because you hate women and you hate black women and you're ignorant. And we saw an uptick in that this election. I think the difference now is black men have finally gotten their voice. And because of social media and because of the fact that there's a lot of spaces that are starting to open up for black men to talk amongst themselves and start building political power, a lot of that messaging and a lot of those attacks didn't have the same sort of teeth that they had in 2020, because black men have had 4 years to kind of sit back under a democratic regime and see how things were playing out and see some of the things that were going on. So what you saw was a lot harder pushback from black men in academia, black men in media, and a lot of black men just who are lay people who are interested in voting and care about their own personal well-being. And I think what happened again was, I think the linchpin of that was when the straw that broke the camel's back was Obama's speech to those young black men in that place where he was
Yeah.
saying, the reason y'all are not going out to vote for Kamala is because y'all are misogynistic, and you better be glad Michelle didn't come talk to you like that's Claire Huxtable or somebody's mama or something like that.
Oh
And
man.
the and the
Yep.
pushback was so intense, where I know it's your show, so I'm not going to say the things that a lot of people were saying online, but it was a lot of four-letter words used, like, "Who are you to talk to us like this?" And I think that shocked the Democratic machine, and I think it'll shock the Obama machine so much that they had to roll out this throwing together black agenda for black men. That came out like 2 days later on that Sunday and everything, and then that blackmail summit, I like to call it, full of celebrities, like I talked about again. You got DL Hughley leading it. And I said something online where I said, in my phone right now, I know 50 black men from one end of the country to the other who are doing community work, who are community activists, who are doing things with young boys and everything, who they could have called to run that. But they fell back on celebrities, and you see it fell flat on BET where nobody wanted to see that. It's like they always go back to black celebrities without talking to the black grassroots, and they're available and they're right there, but they won't talk to them because the people who are doing that, they're disconnected from them as well. But to answer your question, I think that happened because, again, they don't listen to black men.
Yeah.
Black men are already set up as the boogeyman, and especially when you have a candidate who's running, who has a history in California, and who's saying that she would not change anything about what Joe Biden did when he was the person who was the author of the 1994 crime bill, who destroyed a lot of black families and fed a lot of black men into the prison industrial complex. But
Yeah.
nobody wanted to talk about the fact that maybe black men are hesitant for voting for somebody who said they would not change his policies, and their families been affected by that. But nobody wanted to talk about that. But they were able to talk this time, and I'm all the way here for it. I'm glad it happened.
Well, in the infamous clip that she wasn't going to do anything for black people particularly, but you also know in these streets over here, we are an advocate for the 18-point black male political agenda, as was created on this channel by the 40,000 plus members who support the channel. We've been having this conversation for years, really the last 4, about what kinds of policies we want to see for black men. And I said the same thing when was it Abrams in Georgia tried to run her black male political agenda. You can't put black male political agenda in Google and not come up with this. So as I'm looking at both of their productions, all they were was just a rehash of what Democrats were already doing. But you had ample opportunities to actually listen to black men who are not only available to come to summits and actually have a serious conversation about policy, but black men who've actually been recording their policy ideas available for everybody to look at for years. And there's still very little that seems to be done by really either major party, but especially the party that has celebrated getting black votes for generations. There seems to be no serious commitment to actually listening to black men. We're reaching a point where the statements being made about black people having a solid one, kind of one focus about what their political interests are is dissipating. And people are starting to finally have conversations about how split black people are on a variety of levels in regard to policy.
Mhm.
Where are you on that in terms of media reporting about the nuances of what Black folk, what different types of policies various parts of the community stand on? What do you see happening in media as far as explaining that to the people?
Well, I want to use a term that's sort of a cliche, but it is true. Just like they say that black people are a monolith, and I
Hmm.
think black media is not a monolith. But I have to shout out the black grassroots, and I think what's happening is the same thing that's happening in mainstream media. Black independent media is starting to really flex its muscles and beginning to be heard. Brothers like me, brothers like yourself, even brothers like Tariq Nasheed and other brothers who have built platforms to be able to have these conversations.
Right.
I say this all the time. Every time it goes back to slavery. Anytime two or three black men are gathered in a space, Massa wants to come around or the overseer wants to come around and see what we're talking about. What's
Hmm.
happening now is a digital version of that. Black men are starting to talk with each other and they're starting to move into political power and they're starting to talk about how they can build political power and people are paying attention. Now, what happens is people who have normally not cared about that sort of thing before, people who are black in the mainstream, what they care about more than anything is their career and their opportunism and their position. So what you're going to start to see is some of these issues and some of the things that we talk about in these spaces start to siphon off and start to be heard in mainstream. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. That's part of the game. But I think what has to happen is instead of letting people who have never really cared about what Black Grassroots is saying, we have to start demanding that people who have been on the ground in a media way, so to speak, they need to be allowed to be in those spaces to be able to articulate what they have to say. I think some brothers have. I think brothers like Eddie Glaude has been really consistent about saying things, talking about black men for a long time. But it
Hmm.
has to come from brothers in the black grassroots and black media space that have been holding it down for the past 10 to 12 years because they've been there. It's just that now that these things are coming home to roost, and this election is really showing that these things are coming home to roost. Now they want to know what black men are talking about. This is a golden opportunity for black men to build an agenda and get their message together about what they want to say as a block, not separate from black women, but just as an entity amongst ourselves to say what we've been talking about. Because everybody else, every other every other area of the black community has the right to speak except for black men. And I think black men have to stand on their square and say, no, we have a right to speak just like anybody else. We have specific issues that are pertaining to us, and we have to talk about those. So as far as the media standpoint, we just got to be sure that we have people in that space to be able to talk for us and listen to us as well.
Which again means that we need to actually support independent media. We need to support independent news media, most particularly, and particularly based on how we approach this on our show here. We got to support Black men who are actually talking about what Black men are talking about. I think that's incredibly important, and it's one of the reasons that I've supported your show because you have a channel here on YouTube. You also
Hmm.
do quite a bit over Twitter, and you hold discussions over
Hmm.
on Twitter or X, as I keep forgetting to call it that. But you hold
Yeah.
discussions over there on a regular basis. So I appreciate that you foreground Black male voices. But tell us what you think has to be learned from this election moving forward. What do you think the changes are going to be in light of what we just saw take place?
I think, and I talk about this a lot. I think what's going to have to happen is a lot of the gatekeepers, and as I call them, the Negro whispers, are going to have to go.
Hmm.
And when I say Negro whispers, I want to explain this clearly. There are legacy organizations like the Congressional Black Caucus, the NAACP, the 100 Black Men, the Urban League. All those organizations have done a lot of great work. However, a lot of those organizations, and that includes the D9 and a lot of other organizations, they tend to be very insular and they tend to be very classist. I've been in some of these rooms and I've heard how some of them talk. A lot of times they are so caught up in their own class structure and they're caught up in their own ecosystem that they completely disconnect from the people on the ground. And when I say the people on the ground, I'm talking about the regular, everyday 9 to 5 brother going to work, the brother who has to catch the bus, who doesn't have an E-class and doesn't have an Escalade, the brother who's a real decent, hardworking brother, but he's making maybe minimum wage, the brother who's maybe just come out of the system, who wants to change his life and wants to do better, but he's held back because he doesn't have a lot of connections and everything. A lot of times these brothers are just as valid and their lives are just as worthy as all these other brothers. But what has to happen is the people who create messaging for us, the people who have the ear of the real power structure in this system, I'm talking about political power, these
Hmm.
people are disconnected a lot of the times from the people who are in the grassroots, the people who are working on the ground. They have to be moved out of the way because until they're moved out of the way and they start moving in people who are from these areas to be able to speak truth to power, you're going to see these things keep going on cyclical every 2 to 4 years and they have to go. There either has to be completely new grassroots organizations built up, or the people who are in these positions of influence either have to be held accountable or they have to be removed. That just has to happen. Once that happens, then maybe you can get some movement on black issues and issues for black men. And the other thing that has to happen is a lot of black men who are in these positions in academia and in these organizations, they have to find their courage. I don't know if they have to go to the wizard and find it. They need to go get some heart. They need to go get some courage. You work in academia, and I know you hear some of the same stories I have, brothers who pull your coat and be like, brother, I love what you're doing. You're saying the right things. I wish I could say it as well. Well, why don't you? I'm not saying that you don't. Look, we all have to work. We all have to be able to feed ourselves. And I understand that there's a risk taking this, but you have, at some point, you have to stand up and find your manhood. If you see things that are going on and you don't like, you have to stand up and speak. And that doesn't say you have to wild out and start crashing down on people, but you have to be able to bring data, and you have to bring to the fact that you deserve a seat. You deserve a seat at the table just like everybody else. You have a voice just like everybody else, and your voice deserves to be heard. And you have to stop being afraid of saying that. And it's going to take brothers with courage to do that in academia, in business, in some of these other spaces, in media, to be able to do that. That all has to happen.
Yeah. And I agree. Obviously, I think it's something we need to do more of. And a lot of my brothers in the academy, it's hard to get them to have these conversations. And I've literally seen some of these cats see me walking down a hall at a conference, turn around and go the other way. So, but in email, they love you, so it's interesting kind of flip. But speaking of the kind of brothers you're talking about, do you think there was impact from black men in spaces like this, manosphere, red pill, the social media where black men are actually talking to each other? Do you think that there was impact on this election, even though very few want to actually name people outright? But do you think those voices have started to have an impact in ways that nobody imagined would happen a decade ago?
Absolutely. And I'm going to say some names. Shout out to the brother Kevin Samuels, rest in peace. I think what happened is because, and I'm actually working on a piece about this. What happened was because black men were specifically shut out of a lot of spaces. They were shut out of like academic spaces. They were shut out of like talk show spaces, and they were shut out of like a lot of podcast spaces. What they started doing was starting to create their own ecosystem of podcasts. They started creating their own YouTube channels. They started creating their own spaces that have conversations, even Clubhouse, places like that. They had to find alternative routes to get their message out. And because there were so many brothers who felt like they were unheard and being disrespected, I think it created its own fan base. And I think it created its own ecosystem where it started feeding on itself and started building on itself. And it wasn't just black men. You saw that in a lot of white spaces too. There's a reason why people like Joe Rogan and people like that on the other side blew up the way they did, was because they spoke to a group of men, white men, some Hispanic men, who felt like they were being shut out and unheard. And it happened on the same thing with black men. Even some brothers like I'm blanking on his name. Who was the brother who he kept doing the bust down videos every day in his car? You know, I'm talking about the guy who played basketball, and he just started snapping on people in his car, and he blew up.
Oh,
you know what I'm talking about,
brothers. I think I know what you're talking about, but I'm sure one of the brothers in the chat.
Mom's cooking.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm blanking on the brother's name. He was just in his car snapping on people who said he was a bust down when he played NBA. Didn't have a setup, didn't have anything, but it was just brothers talking to brothers.
Kwame Brown.
Yeah, Kwame Brown. Kwame Brown would just show up in his car and just snap on people like every morning, and every time he do it, he started out by like a couple thousand people. Then it started becoming 100,000 people. Then it became like 200,000 people would come on, and many he would come on. And I'm saying all that to say this. Brothers, it kind of reminded me of the birth of hip hop, where it was like just brothers talking to brothers. They were just rapping for themselves. They would plug a light into the street light and everything and throw a block party. That's what black men did when it came to black media, when it came to black manosphere spaces. And that became political power. That became like social power. And it became to the point where even if you look on like mainstream TV, they're starting to name check some of these people and everything. Remember when Tiffany Cross said that it was Tariq Nasheed and the ghost of Kevin Samuels that made brothers hesitant to vote for black women and stuff? Yeah. They're listening to everything these brothers are saying. They're listening to what you say. They're listening to what I say. So I'm saying that to say that we don't really recognize the power that we have with our voices. And if we would recognize that power and start harnessing that power like we have been, we could be unstoppable. So I'm saying that to say, yeah, it absolutely has had an effect, and it's going to have a greater effect.
Well, and that's what I'm hoping to see. I'm curious to see what the next iteration of this is going to be, because I don't think people really saw it coming. But this is an unprecedented time period where you got people, like you said, in their car, on their phone, actually able to be heard. And I'm 50 now, so growing up, this was unconceivable. I mean, I'm used to going to mainstream news to see what most well-to-do white folk think, and then trying to find whatever community newspaper or what radio show I can find to hear what the community's talking about. But now you have cross pollination happening in a way we've never seen before. And I'm just curious how far you think this can go. What do you prescribe for brothers who are at the grassroots level who want to have influence in this? What do you think needs to happen next? And what do you think they should be doing as we move forward?
I think what has to happen is this. You're absolutely right, brother. I think what you're seeing now is sort of a groundswell of disenchantment with the political system, with the social system. And because there's sort of a low bar to entry, all you need is a cell phone and consistency. You can start building an audience. I think what has to happen is brothers who really have compelling messages have to be consistent on that message and stay on top of that message. And we also have to get out of this idea, and this is something that I had to deal with. It took me years to realize this because I came from mainstream journalism. And
Mhm.
in my mind, being credible means you have to put on a jacket, even though I got a jacket on today. You have to go to a studio. You have to get made up. You have to sit behind a desk in a
Right, right,
two,
right.
$2 or $3 million studio to be
Yep,
considered credible.
right.
What COVID did was COVID kind of lowered the bar for all that because in COVID, you couldn't go into a studio.
Yep,
You had to have a message. And it also showed that if you had a compelling message, you could record that message from a closet. You know what I mean? You
right.
could do it from the bathroom. You could do it from a car. And that what that did was it made the public realize that it's not so much the presentation of your message, while it is still important,
Mhm.
it's the worth of your message.
Yeah,
If you sit on the step, if you sit on the front step and hold the phone up and talk and people pay attention to you, you have an audience. If your message is credible and you reach people, that's all you need. And I think what's happening now is people have realized that. So now what you have to do is start building on that. And you have to start building also with like-minded brothers who feel like you and start chopping it up. Iron sharpens iron. And you have to be able to not be afraid of that. And we have to understand that our power is in our community. And then our community builds with communication. That's what we have to do. And if you think I'm lying, look at what's going on now. People try to say these things aren't serious, but look at Don Lemon. Don Lemon, when he was asked to depart from his CNN job, he grabbed the microphone and started walking around like a TikTok kid with a mic, walking around with a cell phone. Now, you see what I'm
yeah,
saying?
exactly.
These
Yeah.
people are following. These people are following the grassroots. The grassroots is not following mainstream anymore, and I think people need to realize that.
And I think you hit it on the head when you were talking about COVID. You were talking about Kevin Samuels. When Kevin hit 1 million subscribers, and you saw on a nightly basis how he would outdo major networks in terms of number of people watching, that I think changed the game. Now, obviously, there were already YouTubers and others that had that level of attention and more, but for Black men, that was
Hmm.
unprecedented. So now
Hmm.
you have, people listening in from all kinds of different backgrounds, even though Kevin was principally talking about a Black American issue in regard to relationships and coupling, but he still had the ear of the world. And that really just kind of kicked the door down and opened up some whole new territories that I think are still threatening the establishment now. I'm hoping people in your position are going to be able to take advantage of this and push the conversation in other spaces.
No, no, you're absolutely right, and I can't shout out that brother enough. What Kevin Samuels was the harbinger of what's coming now. Even though his subject matter was more about dating and relationships,
Mhm.
what he did was he showed that you could take that subject matter, give it a real professional looking patch. Because even if you go back and look at his videos were always very professionally done. The
Yes.
editing was on point,
Yes.
everything was sharp. He always presented himself almost like a journalist. But what he did that was very key was that he presented his information almost the way a lawyer doing a dissertation, presenting a case would. He would just ask people solid questions. He would let people answer the questions. He would also keep control of his conversations. And I think that's what brothers have to do. Brothers have to start talking about the fact that I think what brothers have to do is, again, I'm gonna say this again: recognize your power. Recognize that if you have something that you need to say, don't be afraid to say it. And also, don't let people take you off of your square, and don't let people knock you off of the message that you're trying to say. Because what happens is, with black men, the minute you get prominent and the minute you get a voice, people either try to come in and try to co-opt your message, or they try to discredit your message. And if your message is solid, the people are going to find you. The people are going to listen to you. You don't need $1 million to market yourself. All you got to do is be you. And I tell this to brothers who reach out to me and ask me how they can get themselves started. Just be you. Just be yourself, and people will follow. People respect authenticity. It doesn't. You don't need a suit. You don't need a studio. It's good to have that stuff. I do like it. But
Right.
if you're saying things that resonate with people, you can go look, man. You can get a chair. You can sit in your backyard, stick your phone on a stick, and talk. And
Yeah.
somebody's going to find you, and people are going to respect you, and people are going to roll with you. That's what people have to understand. You don't
Yeah.
need all that. A lot of that stuff is fluff. Just be you and come out, be authentic, and people are going to follow you.
Yeah. I want to change gears a bit, and I want to go back to election night, or really even the day after. Obviously, Trump wins. What are your thoughts about the reactions you saw, especially from women? I mean, we could talk about women across race, and we could talk about Black women. What were your thoughts about their reactions to the election, and what does that say to you about where politics, where politics are right now?
Oh boy, that was an interesting couple of days. Um, I saw a lot of women who were, which I call K-Hive. There were a lot of women who were straight up crashing out. And when I say crashing out, I mean throwing literal psychotic episodes because Kamala didn't win.
Yeah.
And what happens is when you start doing that, when you get, first of all, and I'm trying to be as polite as I can be. When
You don't need
you
to, but go ahead.
when you get that invested in a political candidate, when you get that invested in a politician to the point where them losing makes you literally scream at the top of your lungs and yell and throw your voice out and act like you're in line to get some Kool-Aid in Guyana in 1979, something is clearly either unhinged in you or you invested far too deeply in this politician. I
Mhm.
understand being disappointed. Look, I understand being shocked and surprised by something.
Right.
But what I saw specifically from a lot of black women in K-Hive was that it seemed like their blackness was subservient to Democratic policy
Mm.
and their blackness was subservient to this election. And this idea that black people are going to get thrown back on the plantations and you're going to get thrown back into a situation that we haven't seen before, I thought was really ridiculous. And I feel like what happened was if your political awareness and your political concern is wrapped up in this election and Kamala winning, then you're really not politically aware. You are caught up in the imagery and you're living vicariously through this image of black girl magic that you think is going to carry you vicariously or through osmosis into what you want. And when that didn't happen, I think that's what they were responding to. They were responding to the fact that their tribal god image didn't get the worship they thought it was going to, so they acted like somebody who worships a tribal god image. They
Damn.
freak out, they crash out, and then they start losing it. You know what I mean? That's what I think happened.
But notice that Black men had a very different response, and this includes whether you're talking about Black men who voted for Trump, Black men who didn't vote for Trump, Black men who voted for Kamala. Amongst each population of Black men, you didn't see anything reminiscent of that in terms of reaction. Why do you think that is?
I think it's because the men who are concerned about politics, the men who are politically interested and aware, I think most of us realize that it could have gone either way.
Mhm.
People were asking me who's going to win, and I kept saying like I don't know. It could go either way. So I was prepared for any outcome. But to answer your question, I think to be frank with you, I think most brothers know that no matter what happened on November 5th, we still had to go to work on November the 7th. You know what I mean?
Right.
The world is going to keep turning regardless of who's president. We still got to be able to provide. We still got to be able to take care of ourselves and the people we love. So I think that's what happened. I saw some people who were crashing out. You know what I mean? I'm not going to get into it, but I saw some interesting things online. But there were some brothers who were losing it as well. But I'm thinking, if you are again, like just like I said, for some of them sisters who was deep into it, if you're that invested in a politician, then clearly you're not politically aware enough. And again, you're not doing enough in your community to counteract whatever you think is going to happen. You know what I mean? Because look at the history of black people and what we've had to deal with from Jim Crow to the end of Reconstruction, through Jim Crow, through the Civil Rights Movement up until the modern day. An
Mhm.
election, some Kamala Harris losing an election should not be the thing that makes you lose your mind and crash out and act like you're going to jump out the window like a stockbroker in 1929. It's
Yeah.
ridiculous. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That if anything, you should be like, okay, this happened. Now, how do I go back to my community and how do we build? But because a lot of these people are disconnected from their community, then of course they're disconnected from any kind of solution that will maybe help them in the end. Just
I've
happens.
been I've been saying for the longest. I think the difference in investment between Black men and women in regard to mainstream politics and the Democrats in particular is that I still think it goes back to the promise that white feminists extended to Black feminists. I think the idea that they could be able to prosper and advance without Black men because of this kind of sisterhood idea, I think that still played very strongly in their investment in this. And I think to me, that's what a lot of that frustration was. A lot of them thought, like, whether it was going to be Hillary or whether it was going to be Kamala, that as long as you got a woman into office, they were going to be able to ride that coattail into another level of existence. And Black men were never invited to participate in those spaces at all. I think we were somewhat indifferent. And I think at the end of the day, I don't know if the average brother really knows what the quality of life difference is under a Republican or a Democratic president. I think for us, survival remains, on the agenda. So I think there's a split that I think that's been taking place over the last few decades, most particularly. We could probably talk about longer than that, between how Black men and women are approaching politics, and I think a lot of it has to do with feminism. But there's a question I wanted to ask you about something that I thought about the other day, actually yesterday, teaching classes. This is from my Facebook page, and I just wanted to share a kind of observation about something. Let me try and enlarge it a little bit. All right, so I was coming out of class, and I was observing how many of my Black women students primarily only write. When I give them a writing assignment, they only write about Black women. And then I started to pay attention to it. And I thought about it. I said, when I see Black women starting businesses, a good percentage of them are only marketing wares to other Black women. So they're setting up businesses for Black women. They're writing papers on Black women. They're securing grants and setting up nonprofits only to service other Black women. And based on what we've been talking about and what we saw in this last political election, we can see a political motivation that seems to only service Black women as far as they're concerned. And I said, it seems like there's a kind of female-centered feministic nationalism within a sort of Black nationalism. In other words, you kind of have a nationalism within a nationalism that I think is taking place. It's as if the Black community is splitting into a number of different factions, as there may be enough gynocentric minded men to support it. But what I wanted to ask you about here is, I'm noticing that in this split that I'm seeing, Black women are very concerned about advancing themselves politically, socially, in terms of status, in terms of occupation, in terms of academic work, you name it. I'm seeing these splits happen more and more. And I think your article kind of touched on that when you start talking about the power of Black girl magic, how it's perceived, so on and so forth. Do you think after this election that it's going to continue that way, or do you think that we've hit a moment that should give women pause about how effective it can be for a small demographic of Black women to operate politically separate from the rest of their community, or more particularly from their men? Do you think this is a moment of pause, or do you think it will continue to avalanche this way?
Well, to answer that question, I have to go back and give a little bit of background. You've done a really good job of giving some, but I want to say something. And before I start that, I want to say this. What we have to understand, and I say this all the time, the Black women who are caught up in radical feminism represent a very small minority of Black women in general, but they represent a very loud minority of Black women. They have control of a lot of the spaces where Black people talk. They have a lot of connections to people in power. So their voices and their messaging and their agenda goes a lot further than anybody else's. But to answer your question, I think two things are going to happen, and you're starting to see it now. The women who feel like they can advance in this society, be away from Black women, that small group of women are going to continue with their messaging because it benefits them. Because a lot of them are very connected to the system. A lot of them are very connected to the power structure. And if they can convince the power structure, they just hang on and start going, stick with Black girl magic and listen to them. Those individual women are going to be all right. What's going to happen in the macro is that this loss is going to make some of them reflect and say, has some of this rhetoric that I've been listening to that's been pushed down my throat, is it benefiting me?
Mm-hmm.
Is this rhetoric that's been forced on me by people who are miserable and people who don't really connect with me as a woman, is that going to benefit me? And I think what's going to happen is what's going to continue to happen, that Black men and Black women are going to continue to build with each other, because outside of these circles, that's what happens in the real world. For the most part, Black men and Black women date, marry, and build with each other. It's just that the people that we see, the people who are visible, the radical feminists who write books, the radical feminists who show up on social media, the radical feminists who dominate academic spaces, I think they're going to start losing ground because they're starting to see that a lot of that rhetoric is not working for them anymore. And also, the ones who are not very well connected or married into the system, I said married for a reason, the ones who are not married into the system, they're going to start losing funding, because white power does not reward failure. It's like number one from Spectre in the James Bond movies. If you fail, you go in with the sharks. And a lot of that funding that was going into Black Girl Magic, a lot of that funding that was going into DEI, a lot of that funding that was coming from major donors is going to start drying up. You see it happening already.
Oh yeah.
For your audience, if you pay attention to what's going on in a lot of this corporate messaging, you notice they're slowly starting to wean off a lot of the DEI stuff, and they're starting to move over to more conservative values, and they're starting to move over into conservative messaging because they know Trump is coming, and their audience wants to support Trump. They say it's going to be sort of like what happened with Bud Light when they platformed Dylan Mulvaney, and people started, and the Bud Light stock went down, what, like 10%, something like that, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Businesses care about money. They care about profit. They do not care about your issues. They don't care about Black issues. They don't care about white issues. They care about making money. And whatever their customer base is going to go with, they're going to go with that. So now the DEI and Black Girl Magic is floating out of the way, and they lost an election catering to that, they're going to go to their fan base. So you're going to see that same thing happening in academia. You're going to see it happening in corporate spaces. You're going to see it happening in a lot of these other spaces. So I'm giving you all that to say this. A lot of that messaging that used to keep Black people divided is going to start drying up. And it's an excellent opportunity for Black men and Black women who are on code to jump into those spaces. But they got to be on code, and they got to be ready to move into those spaces, which is like I said earlier, you got to start uplifting and platforming people who can be articulate enough to go into those spaces.
Well, and you can definitely, we can see the funding has definitely been going in different directions. Even by the time Ukraine jumped off, we had Gaza jump off again, which is always the case in a cyclical kind of manner. But then you actually had conservatives who were suing some of these Black girl organizations like Fearless Fund. These things all happened within the last year, and we could see a dramatic shift already before Trump's election that things were going to move in a different direction. But I agree with you with what you're saying as far as the radical feminists. But I'm going to tell you, the group I was actually referring to when I was talking about my students, and maybe I should have been more detailed about how I explained this. A lot of those students are first and second year students, and they couldn't name a Black feminist, right? But there's still this idea, and I think it really came about in the 80s when you had Oprah kind of popularizing Black feminist ideas without necessarily naming feminists. You had a lot of people that couldn't tell you who Bell Hooks was or anybody else, but they still kind of had this idea of women first. And I'm seeing a lot of that's taking place that's not directly tied to radical feminism, but it's still present in the culture. And I think you had some of that even with some of Kamala's followers, right? You had this kind of, Black woman first or woman first that kind of overlap. And I'm just kind of wondering, even for those who are not identifying with radical feminism, do you think there'll be a shift in that culture because it's not yielding the same kind of results it may have in past eras?
Oh, I see. I think that philosophy and I think a lot of those ideas and those messages are deeply entrenched. And I think they're going to be there for a while. The only way that's really going to change is if Black men and Black women who are not really adhering to that agenda start speaking out more. And the only way you can really do that is through either the culture, through the music, television, and platforming people who have compelling issues to say, or it's going to have to come from people in academic spaces or people who are just on the ground who can push back against these narratives. It's going to have to come from home. But unfortunately, a lot of these people who have these narratives and have these beliefs, they don't have anybody in the home can push back from it because, like you said, this has been going on since the 80s, through Oprah, through The Color Purple, through Waiting to Exhale, through a lot of messaging and a lot of imagery in our popular media that says, brothers ain't no good, just be sorry and everything, and you don't have anything to think about that. I think that's going to have to get pushed back against. And I know just from some of the connections that I have in those worlds, it's starting, but it's going to be a slow process, and it's going to have. And if you think academia is hard to move, once a narrative gets focused in Black entertainment, it's very hard to move. But you're starting to see a shift. You're starting to see certain TV shows begin to push back against that. You're starting to see certain images that may not speak to that directly, but they're giving you images that people are getting hot. Like I've been bringing up the show Cross for the longest. I tell your audience, I tell everybody, watch the show Cross on Amazon.
Amazon, yeah.
Cross is an amazing show, but it shows Black men being masculine men, handling their business, dealing with things. And you're starting to see I'm starting to see certain shifts in some of the culture about Black men being weak and not being able to handle business and not stand on top of stuff. I'm starting to see little by little shows that are starting to kind of push back against that narrative. My brothers, the show Johnson on Bounce is another excellent show that I recommend brothers check out.
I'm not familiar with that one.
It's a really good show. It's a show about four brothers who are going through basically basic life stuff, but all these brothers are solid, and all these brothers are just going through life, and they talk about dating, relationships, business, and things like that. Another show to check out is The Madness on Netflix. All this are just regular brothers who are just doing real life stuff and talking about. Yeah, shout out to the brother Aldous Hodge. He's the executive producer of Cross, and he's done a really good job taking black male perspectives in a police procedural and showing you things in the culture that we need to see more of. Just brothers with a wife, with a black wife, brothers who's got dealing with just regular real life stuff. I'm saying all that to say that those little subtle things plant seeds in people's heads who are like younger, and the young brothers who they can see themselves, and the young sisters who can see a black man being in love with a black woman, even if they go through their difficulties, things like that really take effect. And I see things like that starting to happen, and that's where it can start: media, entertainment, academia, and also just talking to brothers in the real world.
Now, see, I can support that, but my question is, do you think that those types of spaces can actually handle black men articulating a political set of interests that may veer from what we've been hearing over the decades about what we're supposed to say? In other words, I've had a lot of people say that black men and women have the same political interests. And I say, okay, if you take the black male political agenda, just go to point one, have a conversation with a group of women about family court reform, and tell me if black men and women still have the same political interests. You get a lot of silence after that. Do you think that the conversation can handle where black men have been moving politically? And this is not just about Trump. This is just about political interests that may veer from some of the more popular rhetorical arguments that we were supposed to, that we're supposed to have. But when black men start having different political interests, do you think the conversation can actually handle that?
Yeah, I think the conversation can handle it, and I think the conversation is going to have to handle that. And I
Mhm.
think this is a perfect time for that because, look, the Democratic Party lost the White House, the Senate, the House of Representatives, the electoral vote, and the popular vote.
Mhm.
That's the worst ass whipping they've taken since Ronald Reagan in 1980. That was a horrible, that was a horrible ass whipping. Period, point blank. So what that means is, from a cynical political point of view, the Democratic Party and a liberal America is scrambling around trying to figure out what went wrong. And what that means is the gate is wide open for somebody with an agenda who is concerned about black men and concerned about putting black men's issues into the forefront. That means that there's an excellent place for them to be able to get in there and be able to be heard. Not so much that you're looking for validation from the establishment political system, but if you get your foot in the door and if you have a solid message that people can resonate with, it resonates with people. And economics resonates with everybody, but it resonates with black men because we're at the lowest of socioeconomics. Mass incarceration resonates with black people, and you can also tie that into black families because if you don't have a man in the home, what does that leave black children and black women? You know what I mean? These things are very serious issues that need to be out there, but it's going to take men with courage who are willing to step in there and do that. You know what I mean? So I'm
Mhm.
saying I feel like the ground is seeded for this to happen, and absolutely the conversation can hold it. It's just going to take people with enough courage and with enough fortitude to be able to get in there and do it.
Yeah, real talk. I want to respect your time. Tell people where they can find you and what they can look forward to coming out of your camp soon.
Well, I'm going to be moving a lot of my work into more writing again. You're going
Mhm.
to be seeing some more. You're going to be seeing some more pieces from me in Newsweek and a couple of other places. Also, I'm moving into podcasting. I have a show called the Torraine Walker podcast. It's going to be on Amazon and a couple of other places. We're still working that out just yet. Also, I'm getting back into doing some more documentaries. I got a couple of
Mm.
ideas and I'm lining up that I'm getting ready to pitch. So I'm taking some of my conversations off that I do on social media and I'm putting them into more hardcore, tangible things where people can really build on. And also, I got something else lined up for January and February that I'm sitting on right now, and I think it's going to bring a lot of people over.
Okay. If you would tell people some of the things you've done so they can go check in, if they haven't already, they can go check some of your previous work.
Okay. I have a documentary that I did called 5 Years, Mike Brown and Ferguson Now. I went back to Ferguson, Missouri, 5 years after the killing of Mike Brown, and I sat with some of the activists who were on the ground there. I did a little bit of research on some of the things that happened to some of the activists who were no longer with us. There have been, I think, 6 activists who were active in Ferguson when everything started off who died. They
Yep.
were killed. They were killed under mysterious circumstances, and nobody knows what happened. Nobody's saying anything what happened. I also do a lot of conversations on Twitter that I'm starting to move into other spaces where I talk with political figures. I did one a couple months ago with Butch Ware, who was the VP of the Green Party. We got about 5,000 people into the space. So I
Nice.
do that. I'm getting ready to fire up my YouTube channel once I get the set done again. That's why it's all gray back here. I'm building on some things. Um,
He done moved into the mansion, folks. He done got the mansion going.
I promise I didn't. I promise I didn't do it on pop blocking or nothing like that. I didn't tell nobody to do the electric slide. It was all work. So those are some of the things I'm working on. Also, I'm getting ready to start moving into having conversations with people who are very well connected to Black issues and Black politics. So I'm going to set that up so we can do that things I can do on a weekly basis where I can have people come in and do a talk show, that sort of thing.
Okay. Look, man, I appreciate you taking the time out to do this. Thank you. Like I said, a longtime friend of the show. And by the way, when you talked about the piece you did regarding the brothers who had died in Ferguson, you did that with another friend of the show, Hood Scholar, Dr.
Yes, sir.
So I want to shout him out as well. So I'm looking forward to what you do next. I want to find a way to make sure we support as much as possible. So don't be a stranger. But I wanted to, again, just thank you for taking the time out. Anything else you want to say to the people before we close out, please do.
Yeah, I just want to tell everybody and tell your audience, look, um, Black people get further when we're together. But that doesn't mean that you have to subsume your voice or turn the volume down on your voice as a Black man for everybody else to be heard. There's room for everybody else to have a voice. There's room for everybody else to be heard. And Black men deserve and they have the right to be able to speak. And do not let anybody dim your light. Don't let anybody tell you that it's not your turn to speak. You have just as much to contribute politically, socially, and economically to the Black community as everybody else. And a matter of fact, you need to demand that and you need to stand on that. And to the brothers who are in these spaces to be able to be heard, who are very prominent, y'all need to find your courage and you need to stand on your square because I hear y'all talking all the time when nobody's listening. You need to start being more proactive and stand up and bring your brothers along with you.
All right, man. All right. Thanks a lot. Journalist Torraine Walker doing some excellent work. You can find him over on X. Where else do you want to point out anything else as far as where they can check you out?
Absolutely. You can find me on YouTube under Torraine Walker. Torraine Walker TV is my YouTube channel. You can obviously find me on X. I'm probably on there way more than I need to be. Also, you can find me on, look for the Torraine Walker podcast on Amazon. I've already got about 10, 12 episodes up, and you can go check me out there. And also, if you want to show some love to help support my work, go to my website, torrainewalker.com, /hashtag support. If you want to contribute that way via PayPal, Cash App, Venmo. And if you want to become a Patreon subscriber, go to my Torraine Walker Patreon page. I'm there as well.
All right, brother. Thank you very much, man.
Thank you, brother. Always a pleasure.
All right, man. Peace.
Peace.
All right. Shout out to Torraine Walker for coming through. He really did it on short notice, and I appreciate that. If you guys have any other ideas about who I can interview, and most particularly if you have a way I can reach them, holla at me. But I wanna foreground different Black male voices in regard to this last election and what they saw, because again, in terms of mainstream spaces, we don't always get to hear where brothers are looking at it from, unless you're in these spaces on a regular basis. But I still want to kind of foreground some of these voices. But I want to shout out those of you who have been supporting the show, most particularly in the chat, putting up information, links, letting people know where to go for different things. I really appreciate that. And there's such a long list of you. I try to thank y'all when we come in just for coming through, but I really do appreciate it. So thank you for that. But again, yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comment section. I'm curious to know, what else could be brought to this discussion. I anticipate there'll be a lot to be said, and I'm looking forward to it. But again, thank you. And we'll be back soon. So y'all take it light, and I will talk to y'all soon. Peace.